Body and Soul, Keeping It Together, Part 2. I can't even keep the title together in the right way. Before I start, I'm going to do a quick plug for our London, UK Evolutionary Astrology School. Mark and I have taken over the teaching. We just had our first year this year gone, and it was very successful. We're feeling very proud of ourselves and the group that we had. And if any of you or you know anybody that's going to be passing through England, we're aiming to have it again this year in Part 1 in May and Part 2 in November. Okay? A few minutes before I start, are there any questions from yesterday? Okay, one thing I want to just mention, because it was a question was asked to me afterwards. You know, somebody said, you know, like I showed that phonographic record where there's a scratch and there's a blip and it keeps on repeating. And the question is, well, that doesn't sound very hopeful if that's what we do. That's the whole point, is to try to stop it there. By bringing what is unconscious conscious is the first step to beginning to release it. So yes, the Pluto, South Node ruler, etc., that shows where we've come, that shows the karma, it shows the patterns, it shows what we've brought with us from lifetime to lifetime through our subtle bodies with us to this lifetime. In effect, it's past life baggage that we would like to get rid of this year, yeah, this lifetime. This year's fine. So, no, that is the whole point of this, is we are trying to move forward, we're trying to evolve, we're trying to let go of those things that are no longer serving us, but which have become such an ingrained habit. They're familiar, we know it, we just keep doing it. You know, it's the devil we know sometimes. The question was also asked, you know, the particular method that I've learned, the integral regression, which is very much a psychodramatic replay of past lives. There are other forms. There's hypnosis. There's so many forms of healing, of releasing. And I don't want to give the impression that this is the only one that works or works for everybody, just because of any healing modality, you can't make a formula fit a person. You try to fit, you know, the formula around the person. And this is the particular one that I've used and I find successful in my own work. I know there's core energetics, biodynamic, gestalt, which one? Constellation therapy, thank you, that's an excellent one. The holotrophic breathing, yeah. So, I mean, explore all of these. I know the work that I've done, he incorporates bits and pieces of all of this, including shamanic, soul retrieval. Okay. Where we left off yesterday then was just going through a rundown on the subtle bodies. And there should be a handout of this. Did you guys, it should be passed around. I've made, handouts were made of this, okay? Do let me know. And okay, well, just make sure it does, because there's a handout of this and a few of the ones I didn't get yesterday. So I'm going to start off talking about trauma and then move into Jeffrey's outer planet correlation with the trauma that take place in the various energetic bodies. Basically, trauma is an unhealed wound. And unresolved trauma means that the person at some level is still in shock. And the challenges of the original incident were probably so great that they tried to get out of it, either emotionally, mentally, physically, but those scars have remained in it, and that's what we bring back with us now. And I mentioned yesterday about the post-traumatic stress, our past lives, our post. One thing about the Tibetan living and dying, and they put a lot of emphasis on how one dies. The reason being, or as the theory goes, at that moment of death, it's 10 times, the experience, the impact it has is 10 times more than if it happened during your life. So if your death, unfortunately, was particularly tragic and your body is frozen in a contorted position, or, I mean, I've done regressions, tragic ones, where there's been an earthquake and a mother's trying to reach for her child and she can't quite get there. It's like moments that are frozen, so you can see the emotional stress, the thought that I can't do it, or I'm not, you know what, they mentally punish themselves. In fact, in this life they come back and they will punish their body parts. That particular body part that failed them, you know, they didn't run fast enough to help save their family in a massacre. They're angry at their legs. They could end up having leg problems. That type of thing. But also at death, a lot of times there is denial, and I'm not going to go into it now, but people who don't quite cross over. But one of the features of trauma is it's not really happening. Another feature of trauma, and which also makes us very ingrained in our emotional bodies, you think about when a person is in a state of hypnosis and you give them suggestions, and that suggestion, which becomes very real, an integral part where people will do silly things that they wouldn't do before, you know, for some of the show ones. But what you're trying to do is ingrain a thought into it. In states of shock and trauma, the person is already in a trance-like state. So whatever thought that they're thinking at that time becomes a hypnotic suggestion, and it makes it that much more ingrained. Just quickly here, I'm going to show you a chart. When I was doing this work, and I also was doing some work at a hospice and bereavement counseling. And when I was hearing about how, you know, what happens at that moment of death, one of the patients died. Now I was actually counseling his wife, the bereaved woman, and so it's her story. I know more, but let me see if I can find my notes on this. This is the moment of his death. And I was thinking, I was trying to see the moment of the death. Does that tell me anything about what's going to happen now in his next life, the carryover into his next life? Will that show up in his death chart? I know I haven't gone into things like, you know, medical correlations, but quickly for this chart, Gemini rules the lungs, okay? Let me just read this out here. Okay. The 6th house ruler, and that's the house of health in traditional medical astrology, is Pluto, and it's conjunct the descendant, still in the 6th house. The ruler of death is in the 12th house. He was in a hospice and he did not want to be there. His wife promised him he could die at home. That was his last dying wish. I just want to be at home. I just want to be at home. He went into the hospice and unfortunately deteriorated, and it didn't look like they would be able to get him home. So against his last dying wish, he had to die in a hospital. So the Lord of Death, being in the 12th house, he's in a hospital and he doesn't want to be there. I hate to say it, but there's that Plutonian on the descendant. I think there's probably a little bit of anger or, you know, at the wife perhaps, feeling of betrayal. I'd say probably more a sense of betrayal. So the Lord of Death is sitting in his ascendant. In medical astrology, that is also your physical body. He's dying. Saturn in Gemini. He couldn't breathe. He had lung cancer, but that last day on his death, he couldn't breathe. And Saturn represents constrictions, blockages. So there was a constriction in his lungs. It shows the fight going on. It was a very, very sad case, and unfortunately, my particular client had nightmares for 2 years of this death scene because he wouldn't go. He fought and he fought and he fought. He did not want to die. Usually at this stage when you've had cancer for a while, you want to go, you're ready to go. Sometimes you hang in there for the people left behind. He fought, and it was like this guy did not want to die, and it took all day, and it was gruesome. Saturn can be the Lord of Death, but it's also the incarnation, our skin, bones. It's our material, you know, the incarnation in this lifetime, and that's quite a power struggle. The planet of death, you know, against the power, the planet of I want to still be incarnated in this body here and now. So, I mean, I won't go into it now, but I have often wondered, what is this going to say about this person and now in their next life? What are they going to be carrying in through their subtle bodies? Probably a sense of betrayal, grief, anger. A sense of I've got to fight, I can't let go, I'm not going to let go. There's one other thing that I want to just point out very quickly. Oh, Mars squaring the Sun rules the 4th. He wanted to die at home. Okay, Venus and Mercury in the 5th house. The North Node ruler is Mercury, and the nodes square Venus. So he's carrying a skipped life, a skipped step into his next life in the 5th house. His wife, who is not the mother of his children, did not tell his children that he was in hospital dying. So his children weren't there. In fact, they were purposely not kept there. I have to say, they were not taking a big interest in his illness or his death. But the fact of the matter is, they are his children. They probably could have at least been given the option. Maybe that was part of the reason. He said he didn't care. If my children don't care, I don't care. But you actually look at it in the chart and it shows a skipped step. So these are probably issues that were all at that moment of death for him, and they will be carried in his subtle bodies for the next time around. Okay. This is Jeffrey's correlations with trauma and the subtle bodies. And now I'm going to be very school teacher here-like and only show you little bits and pieces at a time. So I used to be a university lecturer.
Not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, it's just that I find people are taking notes or something rather than, listening to the actual part. And because this is Uranus, we've got to have it a little bit wacky. Okay. You're taking that down. Again, the mental body, as I showed you in that diagram that you've got a photocopy of, that will contain the negative thoughts, the self-criticism, the poor self-image, anything that has to do with a thought that's carried on. Now, some of the things listed under Uranus, it is the mental body, and you can see here that there's a lot of physical things underneath what I've just told you is the mental body. Okay? I'll explain why. In medical astrology, Mercury rules like our nervous system, our motor nervous systems when we get nervy and that type of thing. But the central nervous system is Uranus ruled. And as I'll show you later when I go on to the chakras, the subtle bodies are connected to us through the chakras. That goes along the line of our spinal column. Our spinal column, Uranus ruled, the bigger nerve system is where I say we're plugged into the mains. That's where we're energetically linked into the big stuff. So a lot of these do have to do with things that would do with our central nervous system, like epilepsy, brain diseases, and something that I was talking to some people with at lunchtime yesterday, tremors and spasms are Uranus ruled. And I know that when I was doing past life work with people at the point of death, and it was quite frightening, they would just shake. And now that is a Uranus ruled thing. Maybe that's part of your subtle body splitting off and going splitting off and going out. And to relive that is also dissipating, detaching, diffusing the energy. Is Mark here? Yes. Oh. One of the students, well, actually, she was one of the original Pluto students when you did it, but she has used as a healing method, the shaking, and for whatever you might.
Reduce the spontaneous recall of past life memories.
Yeah.
People do it for long enough.
Yeah. So it's almost like in reverse. What actually happens like when we're dying or when we're in shock. I mean, never mind dying. Sometimes when we're in shock, I know there's been a couple occasions in my life where I'm, you're actually tremoring. That's a Uranus type thing. And it is a shock symptom, and shock is quite often a Uranian thing. But not only is it a function of showing you the state that you're in, you can use it as a healing method. And also in past life work, people will, spontaneously do it. I think stroke is in there not only through the, the link up with the brain and whatnot, but Uranus and Aquarius rules circulation. Okay. If there's any questions at any point of this, please just shout them out. And I'll tell you have to wait till the end of the lecture. The emotional body. Okay, this is Pluto. It's co-ruled with the Moon and Neptune. And these are all themes we're very familiar with since we've done Jeffrey's work. Betrayal, abandonment, the disillusionment when trust is grossly misused, misapplied, sudden loss, events that seem fated where we don't necessarily get that why. And then collective cataclysmic events, also personal. So here's where the emotional body will hold on to chronic emotional patterns of fear, grief, numbness, like shutting down our emotions. There's been past lives of people where they're completely stoic. In fact, my teacher said that one time a TV station wanted to run a show, a documentary on him doing a regression. And he was thinking, well, I hope I get somebody that's, got something a little bit dramatic to show. Just completely stony face. Well, what had happened is this particular person was a samurai, and there was no way he was going to let out his emotions as he was being tortured and killed. So it wasn't very good for the TV screen because you had this completely contained stoic person. But those are the type of things that would be in the emotional body. Physical body, Saturn. And in traditional medical astrology, that rules our skin, it rules our bones, it's our structure, what gives our body its shape and form. It's our actual here and now on earth incarnation. It's blockages, it's anything that constricts, it's what's cold. But to the physical body, that, it's the whole realm of whatever could happen to your body. Severe injuries, accidents, war, attacks, rape, torture, intense physical illnesses. Saturn in traditional medical astrology rules chronic illnesses, degenerate diseases, birth disorders. So any effect on our actual physical body itself. And the spiritual body, Neptune, co-ruled with Moon? No. No, not co-ruled with anything. Oh, Uranus is co-ruled to some extent with Mercury. That's what I forgot.
What did you say?
I said something erroneous. It was, it's not co-ruled with anything, but it's the spiritual, where you have complete disillusionment, lack of faith, loss of beliefs, loss of values, massive disillusionment. Do you know the times when everything and everyone's failing you, you're in the most desperate, horrible situation? You know how people usually turn to God at that moment? What if you're turning to God at that moment and He doesn't even seem to care? That is the darkest of the dark. That is probably the most isolated, lonely, desperate disillusionment you can have, when you feel that when all else fails and I turn to God and He seems to have forsaken me as well. So just a bit more on trauma. We call victim trauma, where we bring in the fear. Enabler trauma, where we bring in sadness and guilt. Perpetrator trauma, that means we're the ones that enact some sort of trauma. We come in with anger and guilt. Hangovers, where there's been lifetimes of complete boredom and tiredness, just sort of life weariness, where you just check out. These are points usually due to shock where you detach and you just never come back. You survive your life. So there can be a lot of lifetimes where you don't want to feel the pain and you've become so deadened, it's just basically surviving. Unresolved death. alienation, not being at home in one's body, family, culture, people that were sold to slaveries, nomadic cultures, arranged marriages quite often in the Orient, where the young girls were sold and brought to foreign lands because their parents sold them off to be married. Also, this is where you can be susceptible to spirit attachments, and I won't go into that now, and I think there's, the definition or the concept of it is open to discussion and controversy anyways, but it's at that point between our personal energy fields and the transpersonal where other fragments can come and, be a bit parasitic on us. Some of the other points on trauma is like when I say you're seeing it from above, you detach, and it's actually a very, very benevolent way of us to cope with extreme stress. I was just reading an article before I came here about this horrendous rape case that happened in South Africa on this young woman, and I might say it was 2 white men that did it. But she ended up with her throat slit. She was stabbed so many times in her gut that her bowels came out. She had to hold. Does anybody know this story? She had to actually hold them in. But her neck was so badly cut that the muscle went, and she had to hold her head up as well. And the reason she survived is that because of her cut, it allowed her to breathe through her trachea. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to even. And the fact that when she was being raped, through fear, she kind of evacuated her bowels. If she hadn't have done that, she'd have with the peritonitis afterwards. Is that the right word? Yeah. But there was a moment where she had a choice to go off, and she said she did float over her body, and the extreme peace. And she was looking down at her body, and all she could feel was just a sense of peace and relief and indescribable happiness. And I think it's a divine protection that we have in cases like this. Needless to say, she was told to come back in, and she did. I was telling somebody yesterday that at a time in my life where I thought, being kind of double Scorpio, what's the best way to handle something? Dying would be a good option. And I thought, no, I'm going to show that I'm strong, and I'm going to do the thing that I'm most afraid of, and if I can face that, I can face anything. My biggest fear is of heights. So I bungeed off a 715-foot bridge. Yeah, I know. South Africa. And somewhere in your logical brain, the bungee rope's going to catch you, but you're standing up there, and you're staring into this abyss. When you jump, your primal brain thinks, I jump, I die. And what happened is I detached. I got to see the whole thing from above. Yeah, and I realized, I thought, wow, if I ever do want to commit suicide, I'll just jump off from something because I won't feel it. I'll be watching it. And I know it sounds macabre, but in a way I found it comforting when in September 11th, when we had these horrible pictures of the people jumping to their deaths. I thought, good for them, because they're up there watching it. They're not feeling anything as they go.
I have a question.
Sure.
You have the etheric body, the emotional body, the mental body, the physical body. Where is the spiritual body on
outside? It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit in. I mean, even so, it's like when you draw the planets, they're all close together, and in fact, it would take. That's kind of the way that goes. But it's outside of that, and that's the intermediate between our personal subtle bodies and the transpersonal. This is my daughter again. It's just when she was 3 weeks old, this just to show you, this is a little bit of traditional medical astrology. Uranus rules breath. It's our breathing. Saturn, as I said, is constriction. The Saturn moved on to Uranus. She had an apnea attack. She stopped breathing. And fortunately, she was in bed with me, and I caught on to that, and I brought her to the hospital. So that's the traditional medical astrology bit. But what happened is she had to go through such a battery of tests that it was almost like torture. She was poked and purged and bled and cathetered and x-rayed, and like any little kid, she was screaming and screaming and screaming, which would be distressing to most people. What was most distressing to me was at one point, God, I hope I don't cry now, when they injected her one more time for something else, it's just like, go ahead and do it to me. She just immediately calmed down. And I know that at that point, it became too much for her, and she was in a state of shock, and she just checked out. What progresses, and I won't go into it now because it's too much traditional medical astrology that I'm not going into, but again, one of the symptoms of shocks, as I'll go into and with some of the other case examples, is, you know, like the eyes kind of vacate, they go. Her eye turned in. At that moment, she wasn't born with it, but she had a pinned-in eye. It's like she just didn't want to see anymore. And I mean, she does have some eye issues, and like I said, I won't go into that now, but she did not want to see. And she's had, when progressed moon went on to Pluto, she had an eye operation. It worked until the next traumatic event in her life, and it moved again. And it's happened twice more, usually related to mom's relationship dilemmas, but that's maternal guilt. It's her left eye. In fact, traditionally, I was saying that traditionally that's the sun in a woman, and the sun is the right eye in a man. But I have found, especially now with all this Aquarian stuff and us becoming more androgynous, that doesn't hold. You know, we're becoming a bit more sexless when it comes to that. Okay, so shock, you know, some of the things it leaves us with is the body will take in the memory. Even if we've detached, our body knows. And that is quite often where body workers, and I know in my regression work, I will talk to the body and work directly with the body, because no matter where the rest of you are, the body, it did happen to it. I will show this in one of my case examples, but in my notes here, a tendency to fantasize reality, romances, spiritual quest. Do you remember that Sophie's Choice, that film? How she lived in like a fantasy? That was her way of coping with extreme stress and shock. Deep fear of intimacy, inability to bond, lack of trust, resulting in disrupted relationships or drawing in partners who play out an antagonist for your script. Quite often you see obsessive compulsive disorders. It's their way of trying to control the environment so they feel safe. Okay, I mentioned before how the body you can actually mentally blame your body if it failed you in a particular event. Oh, I know how a thought produces a reaction. Again, you know, just how like the subtle bodies work back and forth. You think about just the fact that we can blush when we're embarrassed. That is a physical reaction. An asthmatic who is allergic, say, to roses, if they walk into a room and they see roses, they get an asthmatic attack, even if they're silk flowers. So you've all heard of hypnotic things where they're burning cigarettes on you and nothing happens, or it's not burned and you produce the blister. This is the power of the mind. When I'm doing the work that I'm doing and they're in a state of shock or they're going through a traumatic experience, one thing we keep saying to them, in fact, I'm sure a lot of you use it in your work anyways, is breathe, keep breathing. And that's also the Uranus function, that life force keeping us connected. It's helping try to keep us connected in all of our subtle bodies rather than being out. In fact, when I work with bereavement patients, one of the things that they say is like they feel that they're outside their body. They see themselves almost in a robot-like motion, going through the motions, going through their life, but they don't actually feel like they're inside themselves. And that's what type of body work therapy will help you to realign your bodies back in with yourself. But again, the emotional, spiritual one, the anger at God. Why? Life isn't fair. It can be one of the toughest ones. In fact, just quickly, I had one of my clients is an HIV. I thought I had her chart here. She's HIV positive. Nope, that's, God, hope not, that was me. Well, I can't find it. I'll just tell you, it's a lot of Moon, Mars, Pluto stuff going on. So, I mean, she's had sexual crises in this lifetime. She has a sexually transmitted facing death disease, HIV. The story I wanted to say with it, though, is that she's actually been doing a lot of work on herself, and she feels great. She finally feels like I don't want to say defeated it, but she's overcome it, prevailed over the disease, because she's feeling better. In fact, she's feeling healthier and more fit than she ever has before. And so she was, that was her reality. Fortunately or unfortunately, she went and had a blood test. The blood test showed that she was doing worse. And now she's got that mental thought that I'm actually doing worse. So which is the reality? The reality that she was looking and doing and feeling better than she ever has, or the fact that she's got a blood test that says she's doing worse? I think it's a tough one, and I think, you know, it's a dilemma for doctors, you know, how much they tell people, like, you want the truth, we're entitled to it, but just, in England, they're old-fashioned that way. You've got 2 weeks to live. You know, I mean, honestly, like that. And people just follow instructions. Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
One of my clients is an alternative doctor in Chicago, and he doesn't believe in diagnosing cancer and telling someone they have cancer. I mean, I think he said it was in Japan, maybe, I can't remember exactly what country, where they don't believe in it, and they have a much lower death rate from cancer. But they don't think you should,
Yeah.
they think you should treat the person and work with them, that you should never tell them they have a life-threatening disease.
You know, and that is such a tricky one, and like on parts of it, I totally agree with that, and I know on other, like even more old-fashioned, is you wouldn't tell the person, but they know, and then it goes into that whole thing where they know they're dying, but no one else will listen to them, and the thing they want most is to talk about it. It's such a dilemma, and I think, like, in their case is like to, I mean, the responsibility in the individual case, and I suppose, like you say, treating the whole person. Is this person going to do better knowing it because it's going to stoke up their urge to fight it, or is it just going to make them feel defeated and they give in to it? So.
Yeah, but with HIV, like my friend has HIV, and she started doing really well, and she went, and they told her that her T cells were down, so she started doing adjustments with like her cocktail or a medication or whatever. And so it's like a meter, you know, it's like it's your physical body. If you rev up your spiritual body and your emotional body, but you're told your physical body is down, then you get to, it's an opportunity. It's like you get to transform it through understanding.
And isn't illness one of the major life things that can turn people's whole approach to life around? You know, yeah, sometimes can be quite beneficial that way, and often is the case.
One of the problems they're having in the United States with respect to not putting people in hospice early enough is that they don't then get the benefit of not only the palliative care, which is the pain medication, but also they don't get the benefit of dealing with the dying with their families, so that they can actually do the grieving and the saying goodbye that they need to do, because doctors won't prescribe hospice until like 2 days, 3 days, or a day before the person actually dies, instead of that length of time that they should be doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like a factory. You know, it's get it in, get it out. Okay, I won't explain these. They're pretty self-explanatory. Shock symptoms. Yes, as a matter of fact. These are just ones that I grabbed from my texts with Jeffrey, my teacher texts. This I have from my past life regression therapy work. And the reason I put this up, even though they seem, like I said, a bit obvious, is that it can be the trauma, the shock symptoms of something that happens in the present here and now in our life, but also it's these residues that we carry with us from other lives. So even, you know, our tendency towards depression or feeling shame, fear, guilt at particular body parts, as I said, not being totally engaged in life this time, these could be hangovers from past lives that we're still carrying those shock syndrome, that post-traumatic shock with us. I'm going to quickly move on to the chakras. Did I hear an O? And Jeffrey's Uranus book has this, and I would recommend that to. Sure. Because if I run out of time, what's going to happen is I don't get onto some of my spectacular case studies. Okay, the subtle bodies, our energy fields around us, how do they actually get into our physical body? We have 7 energy vortexes that are our chakras that run up and down along with our spinal column. Are you familiar with chakras? Are most people? Okay. Okay. Different astrologers will give different planetary rulerships to the various chakras, and I will just give you a quick rundown on Jeffrey's here. The root chakra has 3 layers, and you'll see how much sense this makes. The outer one is Saturn, in the middle is Uranus, and the inner is Pluto, which is representing the Kundalini function. In fact, anatomically, Jeffrey said there is a Kundalini gland, which is near the base chakra area, and in traditional medical astrology, Saturn rules the sphincter muscle, the anus. Anyways, and we're this anally retentive society that we are, and that Saturn is the consensus. And what happens? Yeah, the outside layer. Just think of it as like the Earth's crust is Saturn. Inside is sort of the molten material, you know, of Uranus, and then at the core is Pluto, representing the Kundalini, which is our soul memory, our soul truth that's contained within our cell memory. And that's what happens when, like a Kundalini experience, and why people have such huge psychological, psychic, and physiological reactions to this. It's like a volcano erupting and like purging out cell memory as it goes up the entire chakra line. But what happens, you start getting fault lines in the Saturn crust. It's Uranus starting to activate. These fault lines happen. Uranus comes in. It's more individuated. Then it allows for the opening or the reaching of the Pluto, which is the Kundalini function. It's a psychological, biological, chemical reaction. Remains dormant in most people. But if you've got an emphasized Uranus, Aquarius, by transit, progression, whatever, that's when these fault lines in the Saturn, the consensus starts. I'll go back to the Ida and the Pingala if I've got time. Okay, well, the Kundalini seeks out the cells needing purging or purifying. These are memories of this lifetime or other lifetimes that are restricting evolutionary growth. These are alchemically metamorphosized. And as I said, it involves psycho-emotional and psycho-anatomical states that can be quite spectacular or dangerous if you're not ready. It can feel like a coiling sensation. That's why they say it's like a snake at the bottom. And okay, and it's pressure from the base chakra to the sacral one. So it's the sacral one is the next one in line, which rules the sexual organs and genitalia. And that's why people often experience it or associate it with a sexual reaction, because that's just the first one to get hit. Like, for example, Saturn, which represents repression, and whatever repressed is distorted. You look at the sexual things that are happening now, where into the sacral you've got Jupiter and Neptune, 2 very spiritual planets. You know, the sexual function, the sexual energy to be used for a spiritual evolution because most people in the consensus state, the Saturn is the one that's impacting it. You get the repression and then the distortion where it's like the pornography or the complete, what am I trying to say, the whole illusion and the imagery, you know, Neptune, Jupiter, of the sexual function. Okay, so what what we're trying to do is move away from base sexuality to a sexual energy that evolves our consciousness. Where they're located tends to affect the organs, and I'll show you that on my next diagram, actually. But so, like, it's the sexual and organs, and in the men, the prostate; the female, it's the womb. Next in line is the solar plexus. It's located about here. It's ruled by Mars and Pluto, and it's very much about our center of will, our power, where we hold our own or whether people try to impose it on us. Do you notice how we often go like this when we're not comfortable with somebody, when we feel a little bit threatened? We're protecting our solar plexus. We don't want that person's will or power to come into us, and it's a natural thing, and most of us don't even realize why exactly we're doing it, but we're protecting our chakra from somebody else imposing their will onto ours. And again, Pluto being what the soul desires, Mars, how it goes about getting these desires, it is very much about what we're doing with our own power. Because it's the middle point, our lower will is below, our higher will is above. So it's where the two can have a little bit of a thrash out. What am I doing with my power and my will? Is it in alignment with my higher will? Is it in alignment with my lower will? Where it's located, it's all the stomach, abdomen, kidneys, adrenals. In fact, by the way, you know the whole separation anxiety that we have at birth, that we're talking about the natural inconjunct of Aries and Scorpio? This is where we're separated, the umbilical cord. Quickly, I was telling you in my chart yesterday about myself, I've got, well, in England they call it spastic colon, irritable bowel. You don't actually see it in this chart using traditional medical astrology. If you relate it to the chakra system, well, the bowels in my stomach is Mars, because that's where the planet is, you know, on that chakra. It's opposing Uranus, which is spasm. So this is, very useful when you're trying to find, you know, doing your forensics in the chart, trying to figure out what is the core problem going on. Even over and above traditional medical astrology, you'll find a lot by doing this. The heart chakra, ruled by Venus. It rules our heart, lung, breathing, but it's the emotions, what we like, don't like, the nature of our love, our ability to give it and receive it, our self-love. I know I'm running through these quickly, but they are in Jeffrey's, some of his books and on his website. Throat, Mercury, so it's communication. And Mark said quite a bit in his last lecture about Mercury. Anatomically, it's like the larynx, the thymus, the tonsils. It has a lot to do with our immune system. Thyroid in co-rulership with Jupiter. The medulla is a bipolar chakra. It's our third eye. We talk about our third eye, and what it actually is the moon reflecting, projecting the lens. We've been talking about our ego and how we project through the lens of how we see ourselves. That's happening the same thing. What you see when you see your third eye is actually a projection from the base of your skull, the medulla. Your primary brain is co-ruled by by Mars and Pluto, the brainstem. And Jeff said this is where our consciousness actually emanates from. Anatomically, it's the eyes, the sun and the moon, and I had mentioned that before, and we say how the eyes are the window to the soul. So again, using the chakra system, if you're looking, well, again, because it's sun and the moon, it also works traditionally, but something with the eyes, because the medulla, moon, water, you can show up signs of glaucoma. It's the optic nerves. and it's also the metaphysical ability to see what you're seeing, what you don't want to see. The crown chakra, Neptune, and if we're actually fully, completely into our crown chakra, it's probably because we're dead and we've left our body and we've gone up there. It's like our last breath. That's where we exit from. Just a quick word here about the polarities, and we use this a lot in traditional medical astrology too. If one has a thyroid problem, it's often, like it affects your sexual function, like your hormonal function. I'm using one of Jeffrey's examples here now. Stress between the throat and the root chakra. Now this is an example to just say, for example, you see Mercury squaring Saturn in a chart, and so you can go through the usual ones. They've got some blockage in communication, or maybe they've got a stutter, or maybe they've got a constriction in their throat. These are all kind of, the traditional ones. But in evolutionary terms, it could mean they're trying to establish their own survival-based chakra, feeling like I can survive and I will survive in this world by using their, by basing it on their intellectual processes. Or it could show them being challenged by other authoritarian or societal, society or authoritarian types. If I have time, I might go back to this and explain sort of the up and down of it, the actual breathing. It's just the flowing rhythm of it. But I want to show you this. And this is one of the handouts you have. It has it both on it. And I know I've got to make a few more, but which ones are you missing?
The last ones.
Yeah, I've got to make 10 more of those. So if somebody would lend one to me, because I need to actually make more copies. I've given them all out. And I'll do that at lunchtime. Okay, thanks. I'll do that at lunchtime for you. So I won't spend a lot of time on it, but what I'm trying to say is this one gives a few more examples of the anatomical correspondences. So just cross-reference this with Jeffrey's planetary rulers. So when you're looking in the chart and you're seeing those planets in aspect, especially I suppose a stressful aspect, and you see which organs they relate to and the areas and the systems that they govern. Any questions on that? How much time do I have? 10 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to take you through a case study, or as many as I can get through. I've got one that might take the whole time. I mean, I could actually take a long time with it. But this particular one actually ties in very well with Mark's last lecture. Now, some of my clients are astrology clients. Some of them are regression clients. Some of them I've done both. And what I was saying yesterday, what I'm always so impressed is with how they fit together. I get one lot of information on one method and see that the other actually ties in and says the same, or what I get through the chart and I regress them, they come up with the same stuff that we could figure out just playing around, just by using the symbols in the chart, the story that it would tell, and then coming up with stories that are in agreement with that. Sorry, that's not the one I want. Okay, I'm putting up a man. Actually, it was started off with massage. I'm also a massage therapist, and I've been working with him for a couple years. And he's in his late 40s. And I'm going to give you some of his presentations that are physical, emotional, and mental. And you can go ahead and participate and see what you see that ties in with possible things and what some of the woundings are. He's a very charming, affable person. He can be like a Peter Pan type, a lot of fun, a real renegade, quite a rebel. You can see that right away. Doesn't like authority, likes to do things his own way. It's that kind of energy that makes him a lot of fun to be around. He does suffer from, he's a very, very successful businessman. He's very musical, and he's quite an animal lover, and in fact has a small farm. Physically, this is what he presents with. He's, at his young age, because this was about 10 years ago, he had heart blockage and cholesterol problems. He's on 2 different medications, one for cholesterol, one to help clear out his arteries. Can you see any of the signatures here? Leo, heart, Pluto. Sun is Leo in the heart, squaring the nodes. 5th house, Leo, is also a heart signature. When we talk about, as Mark Battery was saying, Leo house. So we're thinking Leo heart. He's got Moon, Mars, Chiron in the 5th house. South node ruler, Moon in the 5th. Circulation problems are also 11th house, Aquarius, so we've got an emphasized 11th house. As Mark said yesterday and today, anywhere you've got Uranus, you see a trauma signature, and this guy's got a trauma signature up in spades. It's all over his chart like a rash. Uranus rules his 6th house of health. He also has stomach problems, like a chronic stomach indigestion. Uranus in Cancer, opposing the Moon stomach. I'm going fast because I've only got 5 minutes. Moon, Mars, Mars being the inflammation or the aggressor, your stomach, the Moon, opposing this Uranus, which again,